The engine of the Army's most advanced stealth hybrid tank failed during a high-stakes demonstration in front of top brass and defense contractors. 3 engineers, bright, credentialed, and baffled, gave it their best. None could fix it. Then someone, half-jokingly, said a name most had forgotten. That day, surrounded by steel, heat, and the sound of quiet disbelief, a man named Eli Halvorsen didn't just fix an engine, he resurrected a forgotten legacy. Eli Halvorsen had once walked away from military service with more metal in his body than medals on his chest. A name buried in footnotes, an originator of designs adopted, enhanced, and long since stripped of attribution. When the Halo series engines were first conceptualized, his handwritten sketches were the first blueprints. But time moves fast in defense contracts, and the people who build the foundation rarely get their name on the tower. So, when the tank failed, again and again, there was no manual, no algorithm that could decode the problem. There was only a strange, whisper-thin gap between theory and reality. The kind of gap a man like Eli had spent a lifetime seeing without being asked. It was the base commander who said his name out loud, mostly in jest. A colonel from a past life laughed and said, "If he's even still alive." Someone looked him up. Then someone else made the call. Eli was out past Tombstone, fixing a busted irrigation line under a sky like hammered bronze. His phone rang twice before he pulled off his gloves. He answered with a grunt. He wasn't surprised. Something in him had known this call would come, not when, but that it would. And when he hung up, he didn't go pack a bag. He wiped his hands, rolled up his tools, and started his truck. No fanfare. No second thoughts. The tank wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. Eli Halvorsen never wore ambition on his sleeve. He was the kind of man who made silence feel dignified. He grew up among shadows, tumbleweed towns, forgotten highway exits, and the cold rot of state-run shelters. By 12, both parents gone to a bad mix of sickness and circumstance, he was already used to being invisible. Not because he lacked worth, but because worth was a luxury in the system that raised him. He found sanctuary in the mechanical, busted radios, junked motorcycles, broken vending machines. Machines were fair. You gave them what they needed, and they gave you what they had. No lying. No posturing. Just clean transaction. By 16, he'd cobbled together a generator grid for a shelter so old it still had rotary phones. At 17, he forged a birth certificate and enlisted. The Army took him without questions. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't care. Either way, he got out. Eli served in the Army Corps of Engineers from 1975 to 1982. In a time when analog was dying and digital was still wet behind the ears, he became known for ideas that shouldn't have worked, but did. He sketched cooling loops on napkins, built synchronization regulators out of repurposed tank parts, and spoke fluent wrench and wire. Those who worked with him often joked that Eli didn't fix machines, he whispered to them until they obeyed. In 1981, he submitted a design for a modular hybrid diesel array intended to increase fuel efficiency and thermal resilience for combat vehicles in desert operations. The Halo won. The system was ahead of its time. His commanding officer called it witchcraft by way of torque. That prototype became the Halo 3 series after a dozen layers of bureaucracy, outsourcing, and engineering obfuscation, but Eli's fingerprints were still on it. Hidden in the bones. Then came the explosion. Fort Douglas, July 1982. A test run on the Halo 3 went sideways. The hybrid synchronization loop failed catastrophically. Fire tore through the maintenance bay. 2 men died. Eli was there, inside the blast radius. Metal embedded itself into his left leg, some of it too close to arteries to remove. He couldn't walk for 6 months. When he awoke in the hospital, there were no visitors. Just papers. An inquiry was launched. One that never looked beyond the easiest answer. They blamed Eli. Not for malice or sabotage, but for unverified modifications outside protocol. He tried to explain that the design had changed long after his original model. But his rank was low, his clearance lower, and his voice buried under layers of bureaucratic fog. He was discharged dishonorably. The only thing more bruised than his body was his silence. He disappeared. Years later, quietly, his discharge was changed to general under honorable conditions. No reason. No letter. Just a notice in the mail. By then, Eli was already a ghost to the system. He drifted through jobs in Arizona and New Mexico, wherever something needed fixing. Solar rigs, farming pumps, long-haul trucks. The work didn't ask questions. Neither did he. Locals in Sierra Vista called him Doc Diesel, a nickname born from respect and myth. Some said he once fixed a diesel engine blindfolded. Others swore he could hear an electrical short from a mile away. He didn't confirm or deny any of it. He drank black coffee, mended things, and vanished into his own rhythm. He lived on the edge of nowhere, in a converted repair shed surrounded by rusted tools and handmade contraptions. No internet. No cell service. A transistor radio that played jazz and border patrol chatter. A dog-eared stack of engineering books, grease-stained and taped at the spine. A military duffel with his last name stitched in a color faded to near invisibility. He built a life in silence. Every morning at 5, he'd start the stove, grind beans by hand, and listen to the desert yawn awake. Coyotes, distant trucks, the creak of the sun expanding metal roofs. He kept journals, diagrams, notes. Not for anyone else. Just so the knowledge didn't die with him. He watched as the world sped up and forgot how things really worked. He saw young engineers rely on software that had never once held a wrench. He didn't blame them. But he also didn't trust them. People talked about retirement. Eli never used the word. He hadn't retired. He just stopped being asked. Until the phone rang. It was a burner phone he kept in a cookie tin for emergencies. The number was clean, the voice clipped and direct. Mr. Halvorsen. General Irvin McNally. We need your help. Urgently. Eli didn't speak. You were there in '82. You designed the damping bridge in the Halo 3 combustion hybrid series. Eli felt something cold press into his chest. You have the wrong man, he said. I don't think we do. There was a long pause. On the other end, he could hear the low drone of distant jet engines and the sound of someone being handed a folder. We'll send a clearance badge to Fort Varnum. 2 hours. Gate B. We'll be waiting. The line went dead. Eli sat back in his chair. The coffee steamed beside him, untouched. He looked around the shed, at the engine he was rebuilding, at the chart he'd made of the desert stars, at the rusted army dog tags that hung from a nail above his cot. He hadn't worn those tags in 40 years. He finished his coffee. Washed the mug. Changed his shirt. Packed his tools. He didn't need to ask why they were calling now. Things break. And sometimes, only ghosts can fix them. Monday. Midday. Heat shimmered off the blacktop like rising ghosts. Eli was under the chassis of a Case IH loader when the call came in. He'd already unscrewed the fuel pump, had a ratchet in his hand, and one knee planted in red Arizona dust when the cookie tin buzzed with vibration. It wasn't a call he expected to take more than once in his life. But it had rung. Again. He stood slowly, wiped the grease from his palms, and answered. The same clipped voice from before, General Irvin McNally. Mr. Halvorsen. We're expecting you. Be at Fort Varnum by 2:30. Your name is on the list. You'll have clearance at Gate B. Eli didn't answer. We'll send a file to the gate. You may not recognize the tech. But the bones are yours. Click. He stood still a while after the call ended. His reflection shimmered in the loader's chrome fender, distorted by sweat and the sag of years. One part of him wanted to ignore it, bury the whole damn thing. The other part, the one made of bearings and torque and problem-solving, was already rolling through diagnostics, blueprints he hadn't seen in 4 decades flaring to life behind his eyes. He threw his tools into the truck bed and headed north. The drive from Sierra Vista to Fort Varnum was long and arid, just like memory. He passed stretches of mesquite scrub, decommissioned mines, skeletal telephone poles that leaned like tired sentinels. In his side mirror, the desert folded up behind him like a map he'd driven 100 times. He reached Gate B at 2:40 p.m. The MP on duty squinted through mirrored sunglasses at the rusted Ford idling in front of him. Name? Halvorsen. Eli. The young man flipped through a folder, blinked. Seriously? Eli just nodded. A low beep signaled the gate unlocking. Inside, the base had changed. New buildings, surveillance towers, unmarked vehicles with antennae like porcupine spines. But some things hadn't, like the way soldiers moved in purposeful lines, or the way heat warped the air off blacktop. A sergeant, early 30s, trim, buzz-cut, greeted him on foot. "Follow me, sir. General McNally is expecting you in Hangar 3A. Eli didn't reply. Just fell into step. Hangar 3A was massive. A monolith of corrugated steel and shadow, with reinforced doors and a concrete apron bleached pale by sun. The interior felt like a lung inhaling secrets, hushed, cold, and tense. At its center stood a tank. Sleek, matte black, no turret, low-slung and predatory. More spacecraft than battlefield hardware. "That's the AEV X9, codename, Widowmaker," the sergeant said. "Stealth hybrid. Next-generation active camouflage. AI-assisted targeting. Dual-phase hybrid engine." "Looks hungry," Eli muttered. Inside the hangar, technicians hovered like bees. Data cables snaked from the tank's undercarriage to rugged laptops. Engineers huddled over tablets. Nobody was smiling. "This way," the sergeant gestured. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard turned as they approached. "This is Dr. Abram Finch," the sergeant said. "Chief Systems Engineer on the X9. Finch looked up. He had the kind of face that had aged in academic lighting, narrow eyes, tight jaw, skin pale from too much time indoors. His expression faltered slightly when he saw Eli. "You're the consultant," he said. "I'm the mechanic," Eli replied. Finch gave a tight nod. "We've run full diagnostics. Replaced the cooling loop. Updated the control firmware 5 times. The issue persists. Synchronization failure between the thermal and electric arrays after 14 minutes under high load. We've gone through 3 different damping strategies." Eli looked past him at the engine bay, which was open like a surgical cavity. "What kind of load?" "Simulated off-road pursuit. 200% torque shift at peak transition." "Show me the array." Finch gestured, leading him into the belly of the tank. The engine was a marvel. Compact, precisely arrayed, interwoven with fiber optic linkages and burnished alloy. The hybrid core gleamed under LED strips. But to Eli, it felt wrong. "Who built the frame?" he asked. "Raytheon Dynamics partnered with Archon Labs," Finch replied. Eli nodded slowly. "They use ceramic pulse mounts." "Bad choice." Finch frowned. "They're rated for double the torque profile." "Ratings don't win wars," Eli said. A young engineer nearby muttered something under his breath. Eli took a small notebook from his pocket and flipped through pages filled with sketches, pressure formulas, and shorthand symbols. He stopped at one that looked like a spiderweb, tapped the center. You have phase drift in your central shaft. Not a lot. But enough to trigger desync once the thermal expansion hits threshold. Finch crossed his arms. We've analyzed thermal expansion. Eli squatted next to the mounting brace, ran a fingertip along a weld seam. He tapped it twice. Not like this. Dr. Finch's voice sharpened. We've spent 18 months on this. The Department of Defense expects a functioning prototype in 2 weeks. We've thrown everything at it. Except humility, Eli said. Finch went quiet. Eli stood. Let me walk it alone. He spent the next 40 minutes like a man retracing the layout of an old house. He used no diagnostic equipment. No fancy tools. Just a small flashlight, his fingers, and a battered stethoscope that looked like it had been used in 3 wars. He moved slowly, methodically. The room went quieter around him. At one point, he crouched beneath the drive tunnel and muttered, "There you are." Nobody heard what he meant. But he smiled faintly. When he finished, he turned to Finch. "I'll be back in the morning. Don't touch it." "You're not going to fix it now?" Finch asked. "I already did," Eli said, heading for the door. "You just don't know it yet." Outside, the sun was beginning to sag behind the far buildings. Long shadows crossed the tarmac. Eli's truck waited like a loyal dog, dusty and out of place amid military precision. He drove back to his motel in silence, the kind that only men who'd been burned before could trust. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table, tinkering with an old carburetor, listening to jazz crackle over the radio, waiting for morning to confirm what he already knew. He'd heard the engine's secret. And it had whispered back. Morning burned hot and fast over Fort Varnum, the sky above it clean and cruel. Eli arrived before anyone else, letting his truck settle into the same parking space as the day before, its cooling system clicking softly under the already oppressive sun. He stepped out slow, methodical, with his toolbox in hand, an old Army-issue green case pockmarked from years of use and war stories no one had asked to hear. Hangar 3A loomed ahead like a sealed vault, but the side door was already open. A private waited beside it, looking far too young to be entrusted with secrets this large. "Dr. Finch said to escort you straight to the unit," he said, and Eli nodded. Inside, the tank crouched beneath a canopy of high beams, its body cold and dark like it was sulking. Around it, the engineers had already returned, whispering in pairs, sipping burnt coffee, eyes bloodshot from a night of rechecking the same data they didn't trust. Dr. Finch was there too, tight-lipped and standing a little apart from the others. He gave a curt nod when Eli entered but said nothing. His clipboard was gripped a little too tightly. Eli didn't waste time. He walked straight to the engine compartment, peeled off the protective cover, and crouched once again near the hybrid housing. Then, without fanfare, he reached into his toolbox and pulled out something strange, a small bundle of copper mesh, tightly wound and wrapped at the ends with old black tape. It looked like scrap salvaged from a shorted radio tower. "What is that?" Finch asked, voice wary. "A resonance buffer. Improvised. You don't need new software. You need the right tune." Eli began affixing it near the primary brace, where the ceramic pulse mount connected to the transmission node. His fingers were sure and slow, like he was playing a familiar instrument. Finch crossed his arms. "You're trying to solve a $200 million military engine instability with a wire bundle?" Eli looked up briefly. "I'm not trying. I just did." Finch didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. With the makeshift buffer in place, Eli stood back and wiped his hands on a rag. "Now heat it," he said. Finch glanced at his team. One of them, Wheeler, a junior propulsion specialist with thick glasses and a haunted expression, frowned. "You want us to run the system hot? It's not stable." Eli said nothing, just folded his arms and waited. Grudgingly, Finch gave the order. The team initiated the diagnostic boot. Screens flickered to life. Engines whined low and mechanical, less a growl, more a mechanical yawn from something waking up too early. The Widowmaker's hybrid core began its warm-up cycle. At first, it ran as expected. Readouts danced. Temps climbed. Power distribution flowed clean. At the 14-minute mark, Finch and Wheeler both leaned forward, eyes darting across the telemetry. This was the moment it always broke down. But it didn't. Instead of a sync drop, the numbers stabilized. Vibrational drift, previously invisible to the sensors until after failure, now pulsed within tolerances. The copper mesh bled the resonance across non-critical pathways, diffusing stress before it could build. Gasps rose from the team. Wheeler muttered a curse under his breath, then a disbelieving laugh. "Still think it's just a wire bundle?" Eli asked without looking up. Dr. Finch stared at the data in silence, then slowly removed his glasses and cleaned them. His hand was shaking. Eli gave a single nod and turned away from the monitors. "Problems fixed. You can build your revisions from this. Use flex dampers instead of ceramic if you want redundancy. But the fix is physical, not digital." Finch's voice came low. "We've spent $2 million chasing this bug. Should have spent 2 days listening to your own machine," Eli replied. It was quiet after that. Finch stepped away, and McNally entered from the hangar's rear, just in time to see the final test results. The general's uniform was crisp, but his eyes showed exhaustion. He looked at the tank, then at Finch, and finally at Eli. "Report?" he asked. Finch paused. "It's holding. Resonance buffer worked. Total system harmony at full load. The instability's gone." McNally smiled faintly and looked at Eli. "You did it. I just heard what the rest of you wouldn't." That afternoon, the tests continued. Not just one run but 6, each longer, hotter, harder than the last. They took the Widowmaker across simulated terrain, including one brutal stress simulation involving a 50-degree incline and a full acceleration pulse. Still, no failure. By evening, the sun hung low and blood orange, and the base began to hum with word of what had happened. Quiet conversations turned into open praise. Engineers approached Eli for his thoughts. One asked if he'd consider reviewing another prototype, this one for amphibious drone craft. Eli declined politely. As night fell, General McNally returned with a different kind of clipboard, one with a seal at the top and a gold-embossed signature. "This is a formal invitation to return to service as a civilian advisor," he said. "You'll have your own team. A lab. Clearance to redesign our next generation of propulsion units." Eli stared at the clipboard, then at the tank, then at McNally. "I'm not a lab man," he said. "You're more than that," McNally replied. "You're the reason this project is alive." Eli didn't answer. He packed his toolbox instead, piece by piece, as the hangar lights dimmed above him. He turned at the door. "Fixing it isn't enough. Someone has to understand why it broke." "You did," McNally said. "Yeah," Eli said. "But who's going to next time?" He didn't wait for an answer. Outside, the night wind carried desert dust across the compound, curling like smoke trails behind Eli's boots. The echoes of machinery thudded against the bones of the building as if the tank was still breathing, finally at peace. A machine understood. Balanced. Alive. Eli arrived before dawn. The sun hadn't yet peeled itself over the desert's edge, and the base still slept in half-light, broken only by the low rumble of patrols and the flicker of floodlights over razor wire fencing. He parked in the same spot as before, stepped out of his old truck, and moved like he always did, deliberate, silent, with the calm of a man who understood the ticking heart of a machine better than the beat of most conversations. Hangar 3A waited, quiet and humming. Inside, the tank stood open, its guts exposed under clinical light. Engineers milled about, some reviewing overnight reports, others still arguing over fringe theories. Finch was already there too, jaw tight and eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. He looked up when Eli entered, but didn't speak. Eli walked to the tank, placed his toolbox on the floor, and crouched. No announcement. No flair. Just a man going to work. He began his inspection not with software, but with his hands. He laid his fingers against the alloy casing and closed his eyes. Felt the tremble, tiny, rhythmic, barely there. He walked around the hull, placed his hand against the main cooling shroud, then traced the armature joint with a gloved thumb. The rest of the team watched, confused. He wasn't reading data. He was reading the machine. Then came the stethoscope. Old, worn, the rubber tubing brittle at the joints. He fitted it to his ears, pressed the metal bell against the mounting points, and began tapping. Slow, methodical, pausing to listen after each knock. The engineers whispered behind him. That's not going to tell him anything. Is he serious? Is that even calibrated? Eli ignored them. His eyes stayed locked on the tank, brows slightly furrowed. After a half hour, he stopped. Walked back to the left side of the bay and tapped a spot on the engine mount. Then another tap on the interface bridge. Then the composite dampers near the central coupling shaft. There, he said quietly. Dr. Finch stepped forward. What? Eli stood slowly, dusting off his hands. Your problem isn't electrical. It's harmonic. Finch blinked. We ran vibration diagnostics. We logged frequencies at all key points. At ambient temperature? Finch nodded. Standard procedure. Eli tilted his head. You tested a combat engine cold? We simulate load with software. It's efficient. Efficient, Eli said, the word heavy with dismissal. But inaccurate. Run your vibration diagnostics again. Only this time, take it up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Get it hot. Then track the oscillation between your mounting brace and your coupling shaft. Finch crossed his arms. And what are we looking for, exactly? Microresonance, Eli said. Not enough to show on cold data, but enough to destabilize thermal synchronization once the engine expands under combat load. Your ceramic pulse mounts are amplifying it instead of absorbing it. That's not in any of our logs. Because you're reading numbers. I'm listening to the damn thing scream. Finch took a step back, expression cracking just slightly. The team looked at each other. One of the younger engineers, Wheeler, spoke. If that were true, wouldn't we see it on thermal sensors? You will, Eli said. But not until the damage is already happening. Resonance builds under heat like a storm under pressure. It doesn't flash red on your screen, it hums. Just under your hearing. But it's there. By the time your algorithm flags it, the sync's already broken. Finch glanced at his tablet, then at the tank. You're saying we've been testing the system wrong this whole time? I'm saying, Eli replied, you've been fixing symptoms. I'm pointing at the disease. Silence settled over the room. McNally entered moments later, reading the tension. Well? Eli didn't look at him. He just said, run the test. At 300 degrees. Watch where the wave spreads. Will it break something? Wheeler asked. Hopefully, Eli muttered. So you'll believe it. Finch gave a reluctant nod, and the team moved. Diagnostic protocols were adjusted. External heaters were mounted to simulate extended battlefield heat. Internal regulators disabled. The Widowmaker was pushed to combat level stress while static in the bay. As the temperature climbed past 250 degrees Fahrenheit, the sensors began to twitch. Here it comes, Eli said. At 300 degrees Fahrenheit, the resonance wave appeared. It was faint at first, a pulsing deviation in the coupling shaft's torque reading. Then it echoed. Across the brace. Into the damper housings. Sensors registered frequency drift and low-level vibration migration. What began as a 0.03% tolerance spread had grown to over 3% in under 60 seconds. Holy, Wheeler whispered. That's. Finch cut in, stunned, that's enough to destabilize the whole array. The thermal sink can't compensate for that spread. Eli nodded. Exactly. The engine isn't failing. The resonance is forcing your electric array out of sync just long enough to trip safety thresholds. It thinks it's failing, so it shuts down. Finch stared at the data, shaken. And none of this appeared on cold tests. It wouldn't, Eli said. This kind of failure doesn't show up in air-conditioned labs. It shows up in sandstorms and ambushes and 300-mile runs across hostile ground. McNally looked up from the readings, something unreadable in his face. Can it be fixed? Eli shrugged. Simple. You change the dampers. You vent the excess resonance. Or you do it my way. Finch raised an eyebrow. And your way is? Eli pulled a folded scrap of paper from his pocket, sketched with a makeshift damping coil made from layered copper mesh and steel wool. A design from decades ago. Pre-digital. Pre-algorithm. Finch took it, studied it for a long beat. This would work. It's ugly, Eli said. But it listens. McNally nodded. Do it. Tonight. We'll retest tomorrow. As the team scrambled into motion, Finch remained still, holding Eli's sketch. You came up with this in your head? He asked. Eli looked at him. No, he said. I remembered it. From a time when we built things to survive, not just impress. Then he turned, toolbox in hand, and walked away. That night, the engineers worked in silence. Eli stayed until the last copper wire was wrapped, until the final clamps were torqued to spec. His old fingers moved slower than they used to, but never uncertain. Wheeler shadowed him closely, watching each movement like a disciple taking in the gospel. No screens, no simulations, just hands, and metal, and intuition passed down through grease and grit. The copper mesh buffer was installed by 217. Eli checked the mounting bracket himself, tightened each bolt with care. It didn't look like much, nothing military grade, nothing polished, but it pulsed with a kind of pragmatic elegance. A fix born of experience rather than design. By dawn, the Widowmaker was ready. The entire team gathered in Hangar 3A. General McNally arrived in full dress uniform, his presence sharp against the bleary eyes and coffee-stained collars of the engineering crew. The air was heavy with a kind of reverent tension, as though something bigger than a test was about to happen. All systems green, Finch reported. McNally gave a simple nod. Run it. The ignition was near silent, no rumble, no growl. The electric hum of the hybrid core came alive like a breath drawn in the dark. Screens flared. Temperatures rose. The tank's internal AI blinked to attention. 10 minutes passed. No sync failure. At 15, a tremor danced through the data, an echo of the old problem. But it stopped. Diffused. The resonance buffer absorbed the microvibrations, bleeding them across the copper mesh and out through reinforced mounts. The entire system stayed in sync. Fully harmonized. 20 minutes. No errors. Then came the combat simulations. The Widowmaker accelerated across the test terrain, its tread silent, its movement like shadow over sand. Drones recorded every detail. Heat, torque, vibration, all within margin. It climbed, pivoted, ran full torque transitions. Still, it held. When the tank finally rolled back into the hangar, the only sound was the settling tick of cooling metal. McNally turned to Finch. "Report." Finch didn't look away from the screen. System held stable. Zero sync fault. Hybrid core fully harmonized under battlefield conditions. McNally looked at Eli. "Extraordinary." "I didn't do anything new," Eli said. "I just listened better than you did." Silence followed. Then, one by one, the engineers started clapping. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it built, honest and hesitant, like a strange kind of apology. Finch joined in last, slowly, reluctantly, and maybe a little humbled. Eli only nodded once. That was all. After the clapping faded, McNally stepped forward and held out an envelope. Thick. Official. Sealed with a gold Department of Defense crest. "This is a formal reinstatement. Civilian status. Advisory role. Retroactive clearance. It's yours if you want it." Eli looked at it, then at the general. "What about 1982? McNally's jaw tightened. "We pulled the files. You were blamed for an explosion caused by a rushed component install from an external contractor. You warned them. They ignored you. Cost 2 men their lives," Eli said. "And your career." McNally offered the envelope again. "The record's being corrected. We're issuing a formal apology. With full benefits. Public acknowledgement." Eli stared at it for a long time. "Too late for apologies," he said finally. "I'm not looking to go back." "Then take it as what it is," McNally replied. "Not an invitation. A reckoning." Eli took the envelope and slid it into his coat pocket without opening it. Finch stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Halvorsen, Eli, I was wrong about you. We all were." "I don't need that," Eli said, but there was no anger in it. "Just fact." "I know," Finch said. "But I needed to say it." Eli nodded. "Machines talk. People don't. That's why they break more." Finch smiled, sheepish. "You know, for a quiet man, you say things that stick." McNally chuckled. "Well, he's earned the right." But Eli was already walking away. Later that day, he stood alone in the hangar after the rest had gone. The Widowmaker sat still under the lights, its armor cool, its engine silent but calm, like it was finally at peace. He ran a hand along the chassis, almost gentle. "Not bad, girl," he whispered. "Not bad at all." Behind him, Wheeler appeared with 2 coffees in hand. "Didn't know if you took sugar." Eli took the black one. "I don't." They sat together on an old crate. 2 generations. One just starting, one almost gone. Wheeler broke the silence. "So, why didn't you take the job?" Eli sipped. "Because it's not about me. It never was. This fix? It's yours now. But we couldn't have done it without you. Then do better next time. So nobody like me has to come fix it again." Wheeler nodded, staring at the tank. "It's beautiful." "It's useful," Eli corrected. "That's better." That night, Eli drove back toward Sierra Vista. The base faded behind him in the rearview mirror, swallowed by dusk. In his coat pocket, the envelope stayed unopened. At a roadside diner, he stopped for fuel and pie. The waitress smiled at him like he was just another old guy passing through. He liked that. Back home, the desert was cool and quiet. The stars were out. The shed was just as he left it, tools on the bench, radio humming static jazz, books stacked like memory. He sat by the window, envelope still in hand. Then, without looking, he tossed it in a drawer and closed it. Some reckonings didn't need words. Some machines didn't need fixing anymore. Still turning.